This week in Minnesota, the bias database. You heard about this? This concerns you. You're thinking, I don't live in Minnesota. It doesn't matter. If you do something that makes somebody feel uncomfortable or biased against, they can report you to the bureaucracy, the government of Minnesota, and you can be put, if the bureaucrats decide, on a list of hate mongers. Why does this affect you? Because there's this thing called the internet, and you don't have to live in Minnesota to be put on this list. The left gets these going in states. Before you know it, employers are going to be checking them. You might as well have a Chinese social credit score system. Listen to this. This is an individual, liberty-minded individual grilling the sponsor of this horror show. This bias registry. Once you go on it, as a bigot, you never get off it. What could get you on the bias database? Listen to this.
If a Minnesotan writes an article claiming or arguing that COVID-19 is a Chinese bioweapon that leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and someone reports that article to the Department of Human Rights, is that something that the Department of Human Rights should put in their bias registry under your bill?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Niska, this clearly, if with the rhetoric that we have seen since the pandemic and regarding accusing Asians of bringing in the coronavirus, that is bias motivated, and so that can be considered a bias incident.
Representative Niska.
I think I heard yes to that, which is very troubling to me. That someone making a factual argument along those lines, I think is something that's within political discourse would be included in the Department of Human Rights database.
Yep. By the way, do you know who else believes COVID might have come from China? The FBI has admitted this. The Department of Energy has admitted. So we're going to put them all on the bias registry. Listen, folks, again, the reason this concerns you. Minnesota sees a tweet of mine. They don't like it. Guess who goes in the bias registry? Me. You. Now there's a bias registry. And guess who's going to search it when you want a job? Yeah, your employer. This is a social credit system. It doesn't matter that it's not operating in South Carolina. It will have the power because anybody in Minnesota can report you for wrong think and you are tarred for life. There is an appeals process, but you have to appeal to the woke liberal Democrats, bureaucrats in the Minnesota government. This, folks, the left just let us know this week, this is where we're going. This, by the way, same legislature that tried to confer rights on pedophiles this week. You don't want to criticize your pedophile friends for wanting to get that job at the daycare center. Yeah, because you could end up on the bias registry. See how this works? And we know that's exactly where they're going right now. You cannot argue anymore. We saw it this week. It is fact. You can also express yourself on my Rumble channel at rumble.com. Tara Servatius, all one word. Crickaboom 61. Great conversation going on there, by the way. Ask this relevant question about the Minnesota bias database, which looks like it will pass, revealing to us where the left is going. They intend to keep you on a list like a registered sex offender if you offend them. Crickaboom writes, what if it makes me uncomfortable to call a boy a girl? Oh, perfect question. What you think doesn't count. This is really a woke database. Now, here's what's fascinating is the second part of this. This is a freedom-oriented, liberty-oriented legislator grilling this other legislator who sponsored this database legislation. Again, don't send me a text. I've gotten some. I live in South Carolina. It doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Because somebody in Minnesota can go online and report you to that database and any employer can search it. And let me tell you, this is going to catch on like wildfire. You're going in the database. Your employer searches it. Come on, you know how these big name employers are. They're not going to hire you. And that is exactly the intent, to break you financially for wrongthink till you're afraid to speak out. Listen to this. Listen to how this would work in Minnesota.
If a Minnesotan is wearing a T-shirt that says "I love J.K. Rowling" and someone sees that and reports them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of gender identity or gender expression bias, is that something that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should put in this bias database?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Niska. I think this question will best be answered by the lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself. I think in the language of the provision, we have looked at the language to make sure that a substantial part of any incident has to be relating to bias and hate and motivated. I'm not going to say a yes or no to that question. It is really up to those investigating to decide.
See, that's your answer, Crick-a-boom. So if it makes someone uncomfortable, then you'll have to go in the database by name and address so the mob can find you. See how this works? Oh, and so your employer can too. Making you unemployable. Sure. Hatemonger, look, you're in the database as a potentially dangerous person. Crick-a-boom writes on Rumble, but what if it makes me uncomfortable to call a boy a girl? Oh, it doesn't work that way. If you are uncomfortable, it does not count. Your thoughts, your feelings do not count. They only count if you are a Democrat grievance group. These are going to be all over the country. The time to shame them, and we won a major battle this week by shaming them, is now. Now's the time to do it. I can't do it but myself. I need the leadership, both at the state level of our Republican Party, international level, to speak out. When they do not speak out, it doesn't matter if the rest of us do. They have to hear from them. Because this is where we're going. You don't want to go there. You don't want to go. Let's jump on the common sense retirement planning text. It's been an unbelievable week. Because, again, this is the week we are really seeing in these bills the left's intent and where they are going. Texture rates, I am going to put them on a list too. Really? You go and do that. You'll enjoy the FBI raid on your home. You'll be a hate monger. They'll put you on their list for being a hate monger. Doesn't work both ways, unfortunately. And if you want to know where they're going with this, take a look at Minnesota this morning. That bias database legislation, this is terrifying, is moving forward in Minnesota. If somebody feels offended, they only need to testify that they feel offended. You can sign a form, and the bureaucrats will put your name on a bias list for offending them, including if what you are saying is, hey, I think that the COVID virus came out of the Wuhan lab. You know, the position of the FBI and the Department of Energy, that'll get you in the bias database. Well, here's the thing, Lee, you might be saying, well, I don't live in Minnesota. It doesn't matter. If somebody in Minnesota sees you saying that online, you can go in the bias database. Final say, you can appeal, but the bureaucrats put you in there. Well, guess what? Any future employer can search the bias database. And as we watch these pop up like mushrooms in blue states, guess what? Well, you got a social credit system. You don't even live in that state. Doesn't matter. Your name's in it.
But what if I'm offended by a governor who says that I don't need an AR-15, that if I want one, that I want to kill other families? What if I'm offended by that?
Nope. See, it only goes one way.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. You want to know how outrageous this is going to be? This is from the debate, okay, on the floor about it.
If a Minnesotan is wearing a T-shirt that says "I love J.K. Rowling" and someone sees that and reports them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of gender identity or gender expression bias, is that something that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should put in this bias database?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Niska. I think this question will best be answered by the lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself. I think in the language of the provision, we have looked at the language to make sure that a substantial part of any incident has to be relating to bias and hate and motivated. I'm not going to say a yes or no to that question. It is really up to those investigating to decide.
It's up to those investigating to decide. So the bureaucrats.
So the Ministry of Truth.
Ministry of Truth. And let me assure you, they will be all woke.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and again, if I tweet somebody in Minnesota doesn't like from South Carolina, from my home, it doesn't matter. I can go in the database. Now I'm searchable as a hateful bigot. And that's what they want. And then you go try to get a job and you say, well, but I was the most qualified candidate. Yes, but you're a hateful bigot. It's a lot of power. It's about to pass in Minnesota, it looks like.